Chapter 1. The Orphans Lament. I remember the loneliness like a friend. Each day, trapped in my bed, I'd listen to the creak of floorboards as others went about their lives, a life I'd never tasted. There were other children who laughed and played, their cheeks flush with health, skin free of sores. They looked at me with pity. I suppose I couldn't blame them. I was thin, hollowed out even then, my skin blotched and marked, my eyes too heavy to lift in their direction. I was something they feared, something that made them grateful to be as they were. The sickness had always been with me, lurking under my skin like a restless beast. The nurses told me I was born with it, that it was part of who I was, like my hair or my eyes. But while other boys were growing strong, I only grew weaker. My body, betrayer that it was, became something to endure, and the world beyond my bed, that was something I'd watch only from a distance. At night, the pain would intensify, pressing into my bones and rattling me until I couldn't keep quiet. They'd give me remedies, pale potions that did little but dull my mind. Sometimes I'd lie awake, gritting my teeth, hating the fragile shell I'd been given, wishing for an end, even if it came on silent wings. One night, though, something else came to me, a voice, soft as a breath but brimming with power. It wasn't like the voices of the nurses or the other children, but something older, something that knew suffering and knew me. It spoke to me as if I were its child, whispering promises that wrapped around my mind like a shroud, offering to take away the pain, to fill the hollow place inside me. It called itself Nurgle. Nurgle's words sank into me, gentle and terrible all at once. He told me he understood my suffering, that he could make me whole in a way I'd never known. "Give yourself to me," he said, "and you shall no longer feel the sting of loneliness nor the ache of disease. I shall be your father, and you shall be my cherished child." For the first time in my life, I felt the warmth of belonging, twisted as it was. It wasn't the caring touch of a hand, nor the gentle gaze of a friend. It was something deeper, something that promised love, even if it came through decay. And in that moment, in that fevered, painful instant, I was his. Chapter 2. A Whispered Salvation. I awoke the next morning feeling different, though not in the way I'd imagined. My sickness hadn't disappeared, nor had the weight lifted from my body. No, I still felt the familiar ache, but now it was dulled, softened somehow. My pain seemed less like an enemy and more like an old friend, someone who had always been there, but now just close enough to remind me of its presence, not torture me with it. Nurgle's voice had lingered in my mind, like a secret carved into the hollows of my bones. All day his promise repeated itself, like a melody I couldn't shake. I knew he was there, just beyond the veil of sight, watching me, waiting for me to truly understand. And I did. Even then, in my feeble, aching way. Nurgle wasn't going to take the sickness away, he was going to show me how to live with it. More than that, he was going to show me how to love it. That night, when everyone had gone, and the shadows stretched long over the creaking floorboards, I whispered his name, feeling the words settle in my mouth like a prayer. "Nurgle," I said, quiet but certain, and he answered. "Little one." His voice was a murmur in my mind, soothing and sweet, like honey laced with poison. "You suffer alone, lost and forgotten. But you are mine now, and you will never know loneliness again." His words wrapped around me like a blanket, filling every empty corner of my heart. I knew, in a way that felt ancient and unshakable, that I was no longer just myself. I was his child, his chosen. And with that knowledge came a strange sense of peace, a calmness that settled over me, even as my body grew weaker. Days slipped into nights, and my health continued to falter, but I felt something else growing inside of me, a warmth, a terrible warmth that pulsed with Nurgle's promise. It was a quiet, steady thrum, like the beat of a heart. I could feel him there, feel his power stretching through me, binding itself to my flesh, intertwining with my very bones. There were times when the others noticed, of course. Their eyes would linger on me, squinting in confusion as I shuffled past, my body somehow both frail and resilient, as though I were not quite human. They began to shy away from me, muttering to each other, their whispers dripping with pity and fear. But their pity only amused me now. I no longer needed their sympathy or their concern. I had Nurgle, and he had me. What could their empty words possibly mean against that? It was in the quiet moments that I began to understand the nature of my gift. My sickness, my pain, they weren't curses, not anymore. They were blessings, marks of my Father's love, visible to anyone who dared to look closely enough. Each sore, each cough, each fevered night was a testament to the bond I shared with him. I found myself smiling, sometimes as I watched the others. They still clung to their health, their smooth skin and clear eyes, oblivious to the beauty of decay, to the sweetness that comes with surrender. I pitied them then, truly pitied them, for they would never know the peace I'd found in his embrace. And as I lay back, listening to the whispers of sickness humming in my veins, I knew my purpose was clear. I would bear his gift proudly, share his blessing with those around me, and perhaps, in time, they would understand. They would know Nurgle's love, and they would thank me for it. Chapter 3. The Gift of Nurgle. The change came quietly, like the soft footfalls of night. It began with a warmth in my chest, a steady, comforting pulse that thrummed with every beat of my heart. I knew it was him, my father, Nurgle, reaching out to me, reminding me that I was his. It was strange to feel so close to someone I'd never seen, someone who existed only in whispers and shadows. But his presence was as real as the illness that plagued my body. No, it was the illness. He had become a part of me, something inseparable and sacred. I first noticed the gift when I visited the market with the other orphans. They had taken us out that day, parading us like sickly trophies, hoping that some well-to-do merchant might spare a coin or two. I shuffled along behind them, barely listening, wrapped in the fog of my own thoughts and the soothing hum of Nurgle's voice within me. But as we moved through the crowd, something peculiar happened. People began to cough, just softly at first, their eyes narrowing in discomfort. I glanced over my shoulder and saw a merchant swaying on his feet, his face pale, a thin sheen of sweat beading on his forehead. And then it spread. More coughs, more faces paling, more bodies shuddering under an unseen weight. A woman clutched her stomach, doubling over as if struck, her eyes wide with a sudden, terrible understanding. And I understood too. It was me. Nurgle's gift flowed through me like an invisible fog, seeping into the air, touching everyone I passed. They were feeling his presence, his blessing, for the very first time. And I felt a warmth bloom inside me, not of illness, but of pride. I had become something greater than myself, a vessel of Nurgle's love, a bearer of his divine sickness. I watched as they stumbled, as panic sparked in their eyes. They looked around, bewildered, unable to see the source of their discomfort. They couldn't understand what was happening, couldn't grasp the beauty of the moment. All they saw was their own frailty laid bare, their bodies betraying them as mine had once betrayed me. But I felt no pity for them. No, I felt something more akin to joy, a twisted joy that filled my chest and spilled over into a soft, satisfied smile. As we left the market, the other orphans glanced at me, fear dancing in their eyes. They must have sensed something different, something dark. They kept their distance, whispering to each other, their voices laced with unease. But I paid them no mind. My thoughts were only of Nurgle, of his blessing coursing through me, of the lives I had touched with his gift. I could feel him smiling down on me, his pride wrapping around me like a shroud. This was my purpose, my calling. I was no longer a sickly orphan, forgotten and alone. I was Nurgle's chosen, his beloved child, and I would carry his gift to all who needed it, whether they wanted it or not. As night fell and I lay in my narrow bed, I felt a new warmth, a strength I hadn't known before. My body was failing, yes, but my spirit was strong, fed by Nurgle's love, by the knowledge that I was part of something vast and eternal. I drifted to sleep with a smile on my lips, dreaming of decay, of rot, of the beauty and sickness. I was no longer afraid. I was fulfilled. Chapter 4. Plaguebearer. In the days that followed our visit to the market, I began to see the full extent of my gift. It spread quietly at first, a subtle sickness taking root in the corners of our little orphanage, like a creeping shadow. The other children grew pale, their once rosy faces now tinged with gray. Their laughter faded, replaced by coughs and shivers. They whispered my name, their voices thick with fear and resentment, but I only smiled. They didn't understand, not yet. How could they? I watched them struggle, feeling a strange warmth rise within me. It wasn't cruelty that made me feel this way, it was love. The love of a father shared through the soft, loving grip of sickness. It was beautiful in its own way, watching them fall under the same affliction that had once been mine alone. Now they were part of me, bonded through the suffering that Nurgle had given me to share. One evening, as I sat by the flickering candlelight, Sister Margaret approached me, her face pale and drawn. She had always been kind to me, her gentle hands bringing me soup on my worst days, her soft voice soothing me when the pain became unbearable. But tonight she looked different. Her eyes held a glint of fear, as if she saw something dark and terrible in the depths of my gaze. "Child," she whispered, her voice trembling, What have you done?" I looked up at her, surprised by the question. "I've done nothing, sister," I replied, my voice soft and calm. "It is Nurgle who has given us his blessing." She recoiled, crossing herself as though my words had struck her. "Nurgle," she murmured, her voice thick with horror. "You speak of dark things. Things no child should know. This isn't right. You've brought sickness upon us." But I didn't see it that way. To me, the sickness was a gift, a bond that connected us in suffering, in the love of a father who understood our pain. I tried to explain, tried to share with her the beauty of it, the way Nurgle had shown me the truth of life, that all things must decay, must rot, and return to the earth. It was a cycle, a natural, blessed cycle, and I was its messenger. But Sister Margaret didn't understand. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and terror, her hands shaking as she backed away. "You're cursed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "A cursed child." And maybe I was. But I no longer saw the curse as something to fear. It was a mantle, a mark of my purpose, a sign of the love that Nurgle had given me. I watched her flee, her footsteps echoing down the hallway, and I felt a pang of sadness for her. She was lost, trapped in a world where decay was seen as a blight, a horror, rather than the gentle, inevitable embrace it truly was. The other children kept their distance from me after that, their faces drawn and haunted. They coughed and shivered, their eyes hollow and fearful, but they never spoke to me again. In their silence, I felt a strange kind of kinship, a bond forged in quiet suffering. They had felt the touch of Nurgle's gift, even if they couldn't see it for what it was. They were my family now, bound by the invisible threads of sickness that connected us all. As I lay in bed that night, I felt Nurgle's presence stronger than ever, his voice a soft, comforting murmur in my mind. He was proud of me, I knew. Proud of the way I had carried his blessing, of the way I had spread his love. And I felt a warmth settle over me, a peace that was deeper and more profound than anything I'd ever known. In the darkness, I smiled, thinking of all those who would come to know his love, to feel his gift as I had. I was his child, his chosen, and I would carry his blessing to all who crossed my path. Chapter 5. A New Family. They kept me apart now, the others. I could see it in their faces, the way they edged away when I entered a room, as if I carried something dark and contagious, as if my very breath held a shadow. But they didn't understand they couldn't. This sickness wasn't a curse. It was a communion, a gift that bound me to something greater than myself. It was Nurgle's love, flowing through me like a river of decay, a father's embrace that cradled me in death and rebirth. The orphanage had grown quiet, as though the sickness itself had muffled all sounds of life. The other children, once lively and vibrant, now moved like shadows, coughing in the hallways, huddling close together, their faces pale and sunken. Their voices, once filled with laughter, had turned to whispers, low and fearful, like the rustle of leaves in an autumn graveyard. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of belonging. These were my brothers and sisters, now my family, bound not by blood, but by the sickness that touched us all, by the blessing that Nurgle had chosen to share through me. I watched them with a quiet pride, feeling as though I were a shepherd tending to his flock, guiding them toward a new understanding, a new appreciation for the beauty of decay. One boy, Matthias, had been my friend once. We'd shared bread on the coldest of nights, whispered stories under the blankets when the wind howled outside. But now he looked at me with hollow eyes, his skin blotched with sores, his hands trembling as he reached out, hesitant, afraid. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Why are we like this?" I took his hand, smiling softly, feeling Nurgle's warmth spread through my fingertips, a gentle pulse of love that coursed into his shivering frame. "Because we are blessed, Matthias," I replied, my voice as soothing as I could make it. "We are special now, chosen. Can't you feel it? This sickness is our connection, a mark that we are loved, that we are never alone." But Matthias didn't seem comforted. His hand slipped from mine, his eyes wide and filled with a fear that cut through me like a blade. "You're mad," he whispered, his voice thick with dread. This isn't right." I watched him go, stumbling back down the hall, his footsteps fading into the stillness. And though his words stung, I didn't feel anger. I felt only pity, a sorrow for those who could not see the beauty in our suffering, who could not feel the love that pulsed beneath every aching breath. I turned away, gazing out of the cracked window at the darkening sky. The village lay quiet beneath a blanket of mist, its houses huddled together like frightened children, and I felt a stirring in my chest, a gentle urging that whispered of more people, more souls in need of Nurgle's embrace. My family was not limited to these walls. It was out there, in the world beyond, waiting to be touched, to be bound by the same sickness that had brought me peace. My heart swelled with pride, a dark, fierce pride that filled me with purpose. I was no longer just an orphan, forgotten and alone. I was a prophet, a bearer of blessings, chosen to bring Nurgle's love to a world that feared him. And I knew, in the depths of my heart, that I would share this gift with all who crossed my path, all who needed the comfort of decay. As I drifted to sleep that night, the silence around me felt like a lullaby, a soft hum of sickness that cradled me in its arms. I was loved, cherished, part of something vast and eternal. And as I closed my eyes, I dreamed of spreading his blessing, of a world bound together in sickness, a new family that stretched beyond the confines of life and death, united under Nurgle's gentle, decaying hand. Chapter 6. Love and Decay. I'd grown used to the stares, the frightened, disgusted looks the others gave me whenever I passed by. They couldn't understand that my sores, my blighted skin, were signs of love, a love that had seeped into my very bones, marking me as Nurgle's own. Where others saw rot, I saw beauty. Where others felt repulsion, I felt pride. Each blemish, each lesion, was a gift, a token of my father's affection, proof that I was chosen. Every morning I would wake to some new sign of his blessing. My skin, once frail and pale, had grown thicker, mottled with patches of green and gray, like the moss that clings to forgotten stones. My eyes, once dim with suffering, now gleamed with a strange light, a reflection of the life that pulsed within my decaying flesh. And I found comfort in these changes, these small transformations that brought me closer to him, that made me more like the child he'd envisioned. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror by my bed, tracing the lines of my new face with trembling fingers. My cheeks, once sunken, were now swollen with the sweet marks of sickness. My skin crisscrossed with veins that pulsed with his love. I had become a living testament to his power, a vessel for his gifts. And as I stared at my reflection, I found myself smiling, a strange, unhinged smile that stretched across my face like a crack in a porcelain doll. The other children avoided me entirely now, as if my very presence were a blight upon them. They whispered of curses of demons, their voices trembling with the terror of the unknown. But I no longer felt the sting of their rejection. I felt only pity, a gentle sorrow for their blindness, their inability to see the wonder and decay, the beauty in surrender. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting long shadows across the empty halls, I wandered through the orphanage, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I felt him with me, a comforting weight pressing on my shoulders, a warmth that wrapped around me like a shroud. Nurgle's presence was stronger than ever, his voice a soft murmur in my ear, a whisper of love and pride that filled me with a deep, unshakable peace. And in that silence, in the quiet, decaying heart of the orphanage, I understood the true nature of his love. It wasn't in the beauty of health, in the smooth skin or the rosy cheeks that the others so desperately clung to. No, his love was in the cracks, in the bruises, in the slow, inevitable decay that bound us all. It was a love that went beyond life and death. A love that embraced everything, even the parts we'd been taught to fear. I looked at the empty beds around me, each one holding the faint memory of the children who'd once slept there. They'd left one by one, taken away to places where they could recover, or so the sisters had said. But I knew better. I knew they'd been touched by his blessing, marked by his love, and that they would carry that gift with them wherever they went. They were part of my family now, even if they didn't understand it yet. I ran my fingers over the bedposts, feeling the rough wood beneath my skin, feeling the life that still lingered there, the faint pulse of sickness that connected us all. And I knew, in that moment, that I was never truly alone. I was part of something vast, something eternal, a family that stretched beyond walls, beyond life itself. As I lay down that night, my body aching with the weight of his love, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. I was his, entirely and completely a child of decay, a vessel for his blessing. And in the darkness, as the sickness hummed in my veins, I found myself smiling once more, content in the knowledge that I was exactly as he wanted me to be. For I was loved, truly deeply loved, in a way that transcended the world I'd known. And I would carry that love with me, spreading it to all who crossed my path, until the very air around me was thick with his blessing, a silent, loving plague that would never fade. Chapter 7. The Last Friend. Matthias was the last to come to me. He had always been different from the others, quiet and gentle, never one to join the mocking laughter or turn away in fear when I entered the room. Even as the others abandoned me, clinging to their fading health, Matthias would still sit with me in the shadows, his face pale but calm, his eyes watching me with a sadness I couldn't understand. He never spoke of the sickness that crept through the orphanage, never blamed me for the whispers or the unease that seemed to cling to every corner. I think part of him understood, even if he couldn't bring himself to say it. But on this day he came to me with eyes wide and dark, his face gaunt, his hands trembling as he gripped the edge of my bed. He looked at me as if he were searching for something, some piece of the boy he'd known before. "Why?" he whispered, his voice barely a breath. "Why did you do this to us?" I tilted my head, feeling Nurgle's warmth spreading through me, wrapping around my mind like a gentle fog. "It wasn't me, Matthias," I said softly, reaching out to touch his hand. "It was him, our father. He saw our suffering, and he brought us together in it. He made us family." Matthias pulled his hand back, his fingers curling into his chest, as though he could somehow shield himself from my touch. "This isn't family. Not the kind I wanted," he murmured, his voice choked. "You call this love, but all I feel is sickness. I can barely breathe, barely think. Every day I feel myself fading and I don't want this." His words hung in the air, heavy and trembling, and I felt a strange pang in my chest, a faint echo of something I'd long since buried. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I too had once feared this path, had once clung to the hope of a life untouched by pain and decay. But that life was an illusion, a thin veil that hid the truth of Nurgle's love. I had seen beyond it, and I could not go back. I reached for him again, slowly, my voice gentle. "You're scared, I know. But this is what it means to be loved, truly loved. It's not about staying whole or unmarked. It's about surrender, about letting go of what you once thought you needed." He shuddered, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I don't want to live like this. You've turned us into something terrible." I felt Nurgle's presence settle over me, a dark, comforting weight that pushed away the doubt. "No, Matthias," I said softly, a smile touching my lips. "He's freed us. Can't you see it? He's given us a new life, a life beyond fear and weakness. All he asks is that we share his blessing with others." Matthias shook his head, backing away from me, his eyes wide and wet with tears. "I don't want your blessing. I don't want any part of it." For a moment I felt a flicker of sadness, a distant echo of loss. But it was quickly swallowed by the warmth of Nurgle's love, a soothing pulse that reminded me of my purpose, my place in his family. Matthias didn't understand yet, but he would, in time. They all would. I reached out one last time, my fingers brushing against his as he stumbled back. "It's all right, Matthias. One day you'll see. This isn't a curse. It's a gift, a bond that will never fade." He fled then, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, his sobs swallowed by the silence of the orphanage. And as I watched him go, I felt no anger, no resentment, only a quiet certainty that he would return to me, that he would understand, in time, the depth of the love that bound us. I sat alone in the darkness, feeling Nurgle's presence like a warm blanket draped over my shoulders. I was his, utterly and completely, and I knew that I would carry his blessing to every corner of this world, no matter who tried to resist. For they would all see, one day. They would all come to understand. Chapter 8. The Gift Spreads. The orphanage felt quieter than ever, each room holding its own silent vigil, as if waiting for something to finally tip over the edge. I could feel it, a stillness thick as the heavy fog that sometimes rolled in over the village at dawn. No one laughed, no one played. The air was stilled by a sense of dread that neither the nurses nor the children could shake. But in that silence, I felt Nurgle's love pulse through me like a second heartbeat, steady and comforting. I was not alone. I was never alone. It had become clear that my gift had spread far beyond the walls of this place. The sisters whispered of illness sweeping through the village, their faces pale as they described the fever that had touched the baker's boy, the shivers that had taken hold of the miller's wife. They called it a plague, a sickness that moved like a shadow, unseen and unstoppable. I listened from the shadows, my heart swelling with pride, a dark, twisted joy filling my chest as I realized the true scope of my purpose. This was my Father's work, his gift moving through me to reach the world beyond. It was what he wanted, what he had always wanted, to share his love, his blessing, with every soul that walked the earth, to teach them the beauty of surrender. And I, his chosen, was the vessel of that love, the hand that carried his gentle decay to those who needed it most. I began to venture out, slipping through the orphanage doors at night, drawn by an instinct I couldn't explain. The village lay quiet beneath the moon, the houses dark, the streets empty save for the occasional figure stumbling home, pale and shivering. I moved among them like a ghost, feeling Nurgle's warmth seep from my skin, reaching out to touch those who passed too close. They didn't notice me, their eyes glazed with fever, their minds lost in the fog of sickness. But I saw them, felt them, as my gift passed from me to them, a bond that would never fade. One night, I found myself standing outside the baker's shop, the smell of stale bread drifting from the shuttered windows. I'd heard the sisters speak of the baker's son, of how he'd been taken by the sickness, how his skin had grown pale and his eyes hollow. I could almost feel him now, his presence like a faint, trembling light in the darkness. And I knew, without a doubt, that he was part of my family now, bound to me by the same sickness that had marked me as Nurgle's own. I smiled a deep, contented smile, as I thought of all those who had felt his touch, all those who had joined my family without ever knowing my name. They were mine, just as I was Nurgle's, a chain of love and decay that stretched across the village, unseen but unbreakable. I was not just an orphan anymore, not just a sickly child lost and forgotten. I was a prophet, a bearer of blessings, chosen to bring Nurgle's love to every corner of this world. As I made my way back to the orphanage, I felt a peace settle over me, a warmth that filled every aching crevice of my body. I could feel Nurgle's pride, his approval, like a hand resting on my shoulder, steady and reassuring. This was my purpose, my destiny, to spread his gift far and wide, to create a family that would never be broken. Back in my bed, I drifted off to sleep with a smile on my lips, dreaming of all those who would soon come to know his love, of a world united in sickness, bound together by the gentle hand of decay. Chapter 9. A Father's Embrace. I awoke one morning to a new, pulsing warmth inside me, something deeper, something vast. It was as though my veins no longer carried blood, but his essence, thick and slow, warm as it spread into every corner of my body. The transformation was almost complete. I could feel it. Each shallow breath, each gentle ache told me that I was closer than ever to becoming what he wanted me to be. In the mirror by my bed, I barely recognized myself. My skin had taken on a greenish tint, darkened by patches of decay that spread across my face and arms like roots digging deeper into the earth. My eyes, once so dull with suffering, now gleamed with a strange light, a spark of life that was both bright and unnatural. I traced the sores on my cheeks with a faint smile, marveling at how beautiful they looked, how perfectly they reflected Nurgle's love. The sisters avoided me now, muttering prayers under their breath whenever I passed, their eyes filled with both fear and a pity that I no longer needed. They didn't understand, not the way I did. They couldn't see the beauty in the marks that covered my skin, the transformation that brought me closer to him with every passing day. But I could feel his pride, his approval, like a hand on my shoulder, guiding me, steadying me, reminding me that I was his cherished child. In those quiet moments, alone in the shadowed halls, I spoke to him, my voice barely a whisper. "Are you proud of me, Father?" I would ask, my words trembling in the darkness. And though he never spoke back in words, I felt his answer, a deep, rumbling warmth that filled my chest, a silent, unbreakable bond that told me he was pleased. The gift continued to spread, reaching out from me like an invisible fog, touching all who came too close. I felt a strange joy whenever I heard someone cough, a shiver of pride whenever I saw a face pale and sweating with fever. They were my family now, all of them, bound to me by the sickness that flowed through my veins, connected by the gift that Nurgle had given us. It didn't matter that they feared me, that they avoided my gaze. I knew they were mine, even if they didn't. One night, as I lay in bed, drifting in and out of fevered dreams, I felt him come to me, not as a voice, but as a presence, vast and all-encompassing, filling the room with a warmth so powerful it was almost suffocating. He was there, truly there, surrounding me, holding me, his love as thick and heavy as the air around me. I closed my eyes, surrendering to his embrace, feeling myself drift further into his warmth, his decay. I was no longer just a child, no longer just an orphan abandoned and forgotten. I was part of something eternal, something that transcended life and death, something that would carry on long after my body had faded into dust. In that moment, I understood the true nature of his love. It was not the kind of love that clung to life, to flesh and bone. It was a love that embraced all things, that welcomed decay, that found beauty in the crumbling of what once was. It was a love that would never leave me, that would bind me to him forever. I was his, utterly and completely, and as I lay there, wrapped in his embrace, I knew that I would carry his gift with me until the end, that I would spread his love to all who crossed my path, until every soul knew the beauty of decay, the comfort of surrender. And as I drifted into sleep, his presence wrapped around me like a shroud. I felt a peace deeper than anything I had ever known, a certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be, doing exactly what he wanted. I was his child, his chosen, his beloved, and I would carry his gift to the ends of the earth. For I was loved, truly, deeply, eternally loved, and that love would bind us together forever. Chapter 10. Legacy of Decay. In the final days, I could feel the gift consuming me, wrapping itself around my bones, sinking into my marrow, until there was nothing left but him. I had become a vessel, a walking tribute to Nurgle's love, and I knew that my purpose was nearly fulfilled. Each step was heavier now, each breath more labored, But I felt no fear, no regret. This was what I had been born for, what I had been shaped into, his child, his messenger, his instrument of peace through decay. The orphanage had grown quiet, abandoned by all who had once lived there. They had fled, taken their fevered bodies and their trembling hands to other places, to other homes, hoping to escape the sickness that had bound us all together. But I knew better. I knew they could not run from him, that his gift had rooted itself in them, as deeply as it had in me. They were my family, my legacy, and no distance could sever the bond that held us together. I wandered through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing in the silence, my hand trailing along the walls. I could feel the building itself had taken on the sickness, its stones thick with a damp, rotting scent, as though Nurgle's love had seeped into the very foundation. I smiled, feeling a deep, quiet pride as I gazed at the shadows stretching across the floor, at the remnants of life that clung to the darkened corners. And as I looked around, I felt a strange peace settle over me, a sense of finality that wrapped around me like a shroud. I had done what he asked, spread his gift, his blessing, as far as I could, leaving a trail of decay in my wake. The village, the children, the sisters, they were all part of him now, touched by his love, forever connected through the sickness that I had carried to them. I closed my eyes, letting my body sink down against the cold stone of the floor, feeling the weight of his presence pressing down on me, heavy and comforting. I was no longer afraid of the darkness, no longer afraid of the silence that stretched out before me. I knew that I would soon be with him, part of his eternal embrace, my soul cradled in his endless, decaying love. In those last moments, I thought of the children who had once laughed and played around me, their faces bright with health, their voices ringing through the halls. I thought of Matthias, of Sister Margaret, of all those who had looked at me with pity and fear, never understanding the beauty of the gift I had given them. They were mine now, part of a family that stretched beyond life and death, a family bound by something deeper than blood. And as my breathing slowed, as my vision dimmed, I felt Nurgle's presence surround me, a warm, loving darkness that wrapped around my body, pulling me into him. There was no pain, no sorrow, only the deep, endless comfort of his love, a love that would carry me into the depths of eternity. My body may fade, my flesh may rot, but his gift would live on. It would spread, carried by those who had felt his touch, who had known his blessing. I was his child, his chosen, his beloved, and even in death, I knew that I would never be alone. For I was part of him, part of his gift to the world, a legacy of decay that would never fade. And as the darkness closed around me, as I drifted into the depths of his embrace, I felt a peace that went beyond life, beyond death, a peace that was eternal, unbreakable, bound to him forever. And in that final quiet moment, I knew that I had found my true home.